Did they actually make a good Fantastic Four film, or is it clobbering time? What is up, guys, and welcome to my review of Fantastic Four: The First Steps. This is the third MCU movie this year. It is the fourth attempt at doing the Fantastic Four. That's ironic. And it's the second comic book film that we have gotten in the summer season. So a lot of different questions going around. Is this finally a good adaptation of Fantastic Four? Is this a movie that shows that Marvel is heading back in good directions? Is this better or worse than Superman? So many questions, so many answers to get to. And to set the stage a little bit, I'm somebody who has seen pretty much every MCU film in the theaters. I was a huge fan, with very few exceptions, of most of the films in the first three phases. I thought Endgame was absolutely incredible. That was the best theater experience that I have ever had and maybe ever will have. But ever since Endgame, the last two phases, it has definitely lost a lot of the luster. It has lost a lot of my interest. A lot of the Disney Plus shows, I just don't think are very good. I haven't watched all of them, and even the ones that I have watched, none of them have really stood out much to me. And so for the last 5 or so years, it has felt like the magic has just been gone from the MCU, with few exceptions. You know, Shang-Chi was really good. I'm actually more forgiving on a number of films that people have been, the lesser received ones than most, but only ones that I have really loved that have come out in the last number of years have been the cameo porn ones like Spider-Man No Way Home and Deadpool and Wolverine. And for as enjoyable as those films are, and for as great as those theatrical experiences were, that's not the direction I want to see the MCU or comic book filmmaking go, where it's just, hey, look who's here. Hey, they said the thing. And so I, like I imagine a lot of you, have been waiting and wondering, is this the end? Is the ship going down? Is this the slowest death of a cinematic universe ever? Or can they actually course correct? Can they see the mistakes of the last number of years? Can they hear the criticisms, address them, and start to make really good, consistent movies again? And for a lot of people, Thunderbolts was the first significant step in that direction, and I really enjoyed that film. So now is Fantastic Four: The First Steps the second significant step in that direction. So the basic premise of this film, it takes place about 3 or 4 years after they have gotten their powers. So the Fantastic Four have been doing their thing for a while. They are Earth's mightiest heroes, and they are publicly celebrated and lauded all across the world, until the day that Galactus shows up and says that I am going to devour your Earth unless you give me the newborn baby of Reed Richards and Sue Storm. And so now the public perception has changed, and the Fantastic Four have to wonder if they can save the Earth and this newborn baby, or if they have to pick one. And starting off with the positives for this, I think the overall message that I want to give about this film is that it really does feel like a continuing step back in the right direction. Basically, all of the recurring issues that most of us have had with the last 2 phases of the MCU are not present here. It doesn't feel like a film that was shot with an incomplete script. It doesn't feel like they were retooling everything in the editing room and reshooting everything back and forth and having a big cobbled Frankenstein story. It doesn't feel like it's burdened with the 5 or 6 movies that are coming down the pipe later. It's able to be its own isolated world, its own isolated story. It's back to being very character-based, and the character struggles are driving the story. The CGI and the effects and everything are really good here and don't feel like they were given 2 weeks to realize what Galactus was going to look like on screen. So I'll unpack all that individually, but this really does feel like we're starting to learn our lessons. We're taking the criticisms of the past. We're steering the ship back in the right direction. And that does make me very hopeful for the future of this cinematic universe. Now, as I said, this is a very character-driven film, as it should be. I am somebody that I like characters and story above everything else, so I always enjoy when we take that direction. And with the Fantastic Four, these are characters that I've never really been that inherently interested in, and I will revisit this later, but I do think we get the most compelling versions of them in this film. Reed Richards is somebody that is very much the smart guy of the group, maybe even the planet, and he very much has like the weight of the world on his shoulders. Whenever they're facing a problem, like he's at the chalkboard trying to figure out all the different solutions. If they're at a stalemate where there's only one solution and it really sucks, he's the one that's like, no, I will find a better way. We don't have to do this. Being being that he is a husband and a new father added in with all of that, you definitely feel, and I can relate to the weight of being a husband and a father and the leader of this team. So I think that as a character, he's the most interesting version that we've gotten yet. He's not just the guy with the stretchy arm powers. He's a genuine person behind all those superpowers, and it comes through really well with Pedro Pascal's performance. Now, I'm somebody that I'm not quite burnt out on Pedro Pascal, but I get it. He is one of those it actors right now, and about every 5 to 10 years, we get one where it feels like they're just in everything, and the public starts to get a little burnout on it. And there were some concerns that I understood about, like, is he actually the best actor for this role, or are we just casting him because he's the it guy right now? And not to say that there might not have been somebody who could do just as good of a job, but I think he does a really good job here. I mean, he's an awesome actor. He's not just, popular because he's a good looking guy. And I think that he brings a really interesting flavor to Reed Richards that's not like the other Pedro Pascal characters that we know and love from recent times. So I thought he was great. Johnny Storm here, played by the guy from Stranger Things, Joseph Quinn. I think he's really good. Some people aren't going to like the fact that the womanizer side of him is turned down a bit. It's still there. It's still present. There's still moments of dialogue and jokes that he's very much the one of the four that likes women, but it's not as overtly like Playboy as it was when Chris Evans played him. So I could see some people not liking his character as much for that, but they really supplement all of that with him being a much more active thinker in the group and somebody that's off doing his own investigating and doing his own research that is kind of escaped by the brainiac that is Reed Richards and him being an uncle and everything like that. I think that he is, again, a compelling version of the character that is interesting. You have the Thing here, who is always the most visually striking, obviously, of the group, but tends to always just be the tragic character. Like when we got the Michael Chiklis version that I did enjoy, I'll be honest, it was always just about him not really wanting to be the guy covered in rock, and who the hell would? And I like the fact that we got away from that here. Like there's a moment where he gets like a reflection in the TV looking at his old self where you can get that in that moment. But his character arc in this movie is not about him embracing being the Thing. He's already fully embraced it. He loves the fact that he's the Thing. But him, it's much more of kind of the comedic back and forth with Johnny Storm, as well as, no pun intended, being the rock for Reed Richards and Sue Storm in all of their times of need. So I appreciated that version. But most of all, Sue Storm was the one that actually stood out here. And I don't want to offend any comic book fans here, but I've always found her to be such a boring character with the iterations that we've gotten in the movies. She's just the chick that turns invisible, which in and of itself, that power's not really all that interesting. And I just never really felt much of a character arc with previous iterations of the Fantastic Four. Whereas in this one, I think she's the heart and soul of the movie, being the new mother, being somebody that has to face a world of people, literally, who on paper want her basically to hand over her newborn child for the good of everybody else. There's a scene where she has to make this public statement and talk about how she is not going to give up Earth or her child. It's very well done. The performance by Vanessa Kirby is great all throughout, even the first half before the baby shows up. Got great chemistry with Pedro Pascal. So, all the way through the film, but especially in the back half after the baby shows up, I thought that she was the standout of this Fantastic Four. She was the most human of all of them, even though I'm not a mother, I'm a father, but there is some slight differences there. There was so much about that side of her character that I just really, really latched into, and where things ultimately go by the third act and the big battle with Galactus and what she's willing to do and what she's willing to sacrifice. I just thought it was a very well done version of the character that actually makes me interested in her, which is more than I can say for the other ones I've seen. Another thing that I thought was great about this film is that it really does have its own distinct style because it has its own distinct world. This is like Earth 818 or something like that. It's one of the other multiverses that's within the MCU, but it's not the Earth that we're used to seeing. And so I've seen a lot of comparisons to the Jetsons, where it's very 60s based with the aesthetic and with the vibe of everything going on, but very futuristic, where you got flying cars and that nice mix of the old and the new. And that's very much a valid comparison. This is kind of like the Jetsons movie, and I love it for that. I think that it's awesome. I think that it gives a really unique vibe about the film. I think that it's very fun and nostalgic to kind of go and despite all the futuristic things happening, all the sci-fi bizarreness, you can pick out all the like old commercials and old cartoons and things that make you very nostalgic, even though it's like a futuristic world. It's an odd mix, but it works. And that also adds in with letting the movie not feel like it's burdened with all the other things going on. You're not watching this wondering, well, what's going on with the Celestials in the ocean? And what's Iron Man up to? And how the fuck is Spider-Man not swinging in to help with Galactus? Like, you don't have any of those questions because you understand from the beginning, this is its own thing. And I miss that. I love the crossover movies. I love when movies can have, different guest stars and they can cross over in this universe. It's what the MCU did before anybody else was really able to do. But sometimes that does feel like a burden. Sometimes characters do need to have their own story and their own struggles and their own stakes without all of the extra universe shit. And I think this is one of the best films in this universe to do that. I thought the special effects were awesome all the way across the board. I think that it's the best visual effects that we've gotten on all of these characters' powers, as well as the character of Galactus. I wasn't sure if that character was going to be the uncanny valley of the movie, but I think for such a literally larger than life character, they do a really good job at bringing him to life. Even all the sci-fi bizarreness of the world and that Jetsons look, and when they actually go into space at one point, all of that is visualized very well. So again, a movie that feels like it was given the time it needed to be the best version of itself. And having got out of Superman a couple of weeks ago, one of the biggest words that people have used to describe their experience with that film is that it's hopeful, that it gives them hope again. It makes them like enjoy the goodness of all of us, which too often we forget about. And while I don't think that's as much of an overt part of this movie, I do think that that's also a key piece here that I really enjoyed, especially after the public perception turns on them. You have all the people, all the news reports and everything trying to villainize the Fantastic Four, and you really look at that and like, yeah, that's exactly how it would be. Like we would absolutely be cold and selfish and be like, yeah, fuck that kid. Sorry, I want to live. But as the movie goes on and the heroic nature of the Fantastic Four, inspires people, especially Sue Storm, I liked seeing the turn of all that and how all that plays out by the third act, which yet again kind of leans into the more hopeful side of humanity that I wish I could see a lot more of in our own reality. And the last thing that I'll say here is that I do also feel like this movie gets back to that era of the MCU where it really felt like the director's vision was able to shine a bit more. Now, there's always been mandates, there's always been certain criteria that these filmmakers have had to follow and certain boxes that they've had to check to fit in with all of the plans. So there's never really been like a wholly original vision inside of the universe, but back in the day, you could tell when Kenneth Branagh did an MCU film, when James Gunn did an MCU film, and it felt like over the last 4 or 5 years, with few exceptions, we've kind of sanitized that where everything really looks and feels the same. Even when you got a movie made by Sam Raimi, the scenes that are very clearly Sam Raimi scenes stand out so much because so much of the rest of the film feels like Kevin Feige directed it. And I feel like the Fantastic Four First Steps really makes Matt Shakman's style stand out. He's the guy that directed WandaVision, which from what I can tell is still probably the highest praised MCU show, the ones that fans seem to like the most and still appreciate the most. And you can tell that a lot of the style of this film came from him and ways that he wanted to visualize this world and some of the weirdness and the bizarreness and that Jetsons vibe that I keep going back to. And it doesn't just feel like Kevin Feige was directing this from, behind some stand-in director who was just like my buddy Sean Chandler calls him a McDonald's manager. You're just here to kind of make everything work exactly how all the other stores work. So I appreciate that. This does fit obviously into their plans, and I'm sure more of the crossover movies will have less of this, but I like the fact that this is such a distinct movie that was able to be its own thing. Moving on to the mixed, and these are a couple things that I don't really hold against this film. It's not like I'm taking points off of the movie because of this, because it's things that are outside of the film's control, but I do think it's valid to bring them up to kind of color out what my experience with the movie is and what these characters are, because it very much is going to impact how I enjoy this film. And the main one is I've just never really been a Fantastic Four fan. I've never been that enamored with the characters. I've never found them to be all that interesting or cool, or there's just no allure to these characters for me like so many other comic book characters. And some of that might even be burnout, because in my lifetime, we've gotten so many bad or lackluster adaptations of them on the big screen. And so you walk into this one going, oh, yet again with these characters. And they've done a significantly better job here. So we're taking a step in the right direction. I do like them, especially Sue Storm. You've hooked me. And so there's a lot of potential that the more we see these characters in Doomsday or however many times they're going to show up before this thing reboots itself, that I could become a much bigger Fantastic Four fan. But I am walking into this with a little bit of disinterest, a little bit of burnout with the characters themselves. I also think another thing that's valid to bring up that is not this movie's fault is that at least with the basic premise, the setup, and certain elements of the plot, this is very similar to Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer. You have the emergence of Galactus, you have the entrance of the Silver Surfer, given this little grim death sentence to Earth, and you even have a sequence where Johnny Storm flies after him, goes into space, catches him, they have this little sinister interaction, and then he falls back to Earth. Like, there's a lot of things about this version that is different. You know, the baby being in there, the way that Galactus is visualized, not being a fucking cloud, even the certain elements of the plot that are going on within these characters and their individual character arcs are very different. So I'm not saying that the movies are exactly the same at all, but there's a lot of similarities. And so even though I enjoy this version much more than I enjoyed that version, this is a movie where a lot of it I'm watching it feeling like I've kind of seen this movie before. Now moving on to the negatives, and just kind of piggybacking off of what I just said about feeling like I've seen the movie before, there were a number of points in the film where I did find myself a little bit bored with what was going on. I don't know how much of that is just because there's elements of the plot that is similar to a film I've already seen. I don't know how much of that is getting back into these characters, and we don't have to sit through their origin necessarily, but getting reintroduced to these characters again has its own form of kind of burnout, as I've already talked about. Certain elements of it where it feels like we're building to an ultimate conclusion that I'm not fully bought into, with Galactus as the villain. And I guess I'll just start talking about Galactus. I don't really understand the hype with that character. You know, Galactus is one of these villains that comic book fans especially are so big on. And when we got the Cloud version, they were so offended and like, oh my God, hopefully one day somebody actually does Galactus justice. And from what I've heard, this is them doing him justice. And if that's the truth, then even the best version of this character, I just don't find to be all that compelling. You know, he's essentially a kaiju. And you guys that have watched me for a while know I don't really get into the kaiju stuff. Just big, gigantic villain that we can't really have a meaningful square off with. We could just kind of fly around him and do certain things because we're this big compared to him. I just don't find that type of confrontation, that type of third act, that type of hero versus villain storyline to be nearly as compelling as a much more human or a more complicated villain, we'll say, versus just a giant behemoth that wants to eat planets. And so really the only element of the film that I really latched into as far as the fight with Galactus is the baby and their relationship to the baby. And so anytime that was kind of the core piece of it, I was certainly invested. Anytime it was like, oh, we got to go fight Galactus, or we got to go talk to Galactus, or fuck, Galactus is here, I was just kind of disengaged with it because I'm just not a Galactus fan, I guess. Despite me liking their characterization, I do feel like Johnny Storm and even more so the Thing get a bit shortchanged in the story here. I feel like they're more the comedic relief of the movie. Their banter back and forth, whether they're being antagonistic with each other or they're high-fiving each other, is the more fun elements of the film, but all of the heart and the soul and the stakes are all with Reed Richards and Sue Storm. Whereas the other two, I just feel like I didn't get to know them as much as I wanted to. You know, there's a little bit of a storyline going on with the Thing and Natasha Lyonne as kind of a love interest. That's barely even a part of the film. Like, you could almost cut it out and the movie's exactly the same. So like, even just elements like that, I wish were fleshed out a little bit more so that I could feel as invested in who these two are as I am Reed Richards and especially Sue Storm. I also didn't find the comedy in the film to be that great. Now, it's not like cringy comedy. You know, there is a certain brand of MCU humor that sometimes it works great. Sometimes it's absolutely annoying at how much it falls flat. I don't think this movie has that problem, but its attempts to make me laugh just weren't really all that successful, as well as the rest of my theater. There weren't really any chuckles in the movie. So even though there were some funny back and forth and banter among these characters and some of the situational humor in a few spots, I just wish that was maybe a stronger element of the film, would have made it a little bit more fun for me.
It's clobbering time! That's just in the cartoon.
And the last thing that I'll say here really isn't anything to do with this film, but it's a slight worry that I have for the future, and that's just building up to the rivalry between the Fantastic Four, namely Reed Richards and Doctor Doom. You know, that's a classic rivalry right there that I'm afraid we may miss out on, at least miss out on the best parts of it, because we are very much having to inject Doctor Doom late in the universe rather than build up to him the way that we did Thanos. They could pull it off. We'll see when we get to Doomsday and all of that. And I think that it's going to be compelling to see Pedro Pascal and Robert Downey Jr. have that rivalry if they do it the right way. But even though I like the fact we skip the origin, we get right into the action, we're at year 4 of Fantastic Four, there's a piece of me that really wishes I could have seen some of the origin between Reed Richards and Doctor Doom, assuming that they're still sticking with that version of the character where they like went to college together and they knew each other. If this is a totally different take, then I guess that's the reason why we haven't seen it, which is why I can't really take points off for that. But as somebody that is very much interested and compelled by the Doctor Doom character, I just hope we're not missing out on the best piece of that rivalry. But overall, guys, what I will say is that this was an enjoyable MCU film. It was an enjoyable Fantastic Four film, and I do think that it is continuing a step in the right direction that continues to make me more hopeful for the MCU, and especially with me enjoying Superman so much a couple of weeks ago, just the state of comic book movie filmmaking in general. So it's been a good summer for comic book films, where we've had some rough ones very recently. So if you're a huge Fantastic Four fan, if you just love Marvel characters, and as long as the movie's good, you're going to have a blast, definitely recommend you checking this one out. As somebody who's not huge into Fantastic Four, I don't think I enjoyed it near as much as some others have. But even with that said, I thought it was a really well done movie that I'm invested in the characters and seeing where they go in the future. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, click over here for my 2025 new release reviews. I'll also put my review of Thunderbolts up here for you to check out if you missed it. I may do some kind of an updated ranking on the MCU, like a tier list or something like that, but no promises. But like, share, hit the subscribe button so that you maybe see that in the future. And as always, guys, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.